sense of place. I will be a part of that program along with several other people. If you'd like to know more about it. This is not really picking up consistently, is it? Where is it? It will be here in Danville on September 18th, 19th. A little flyer gives details. Also on that table is a yellow pamphlet which describes the context out of which what we're doing today arises. The art of placemaking, as I call it, describes my work as a practitioner of the art of placemaking. And then finally there's a pamphlet or a paper describing the guided pilgrimage, which is a 6-month program for people to learn to develop their sensitivities to the energies of place and to become stewards of the earth in a new sense. Well, some of what I'm trying to say here will come out in what we do here today. There are also some materials up in the bookstore that go into some of these subjects in more detail. Let's wait about 2 or 3 more minutes before we lift off. Not everybody's watch is running at the same time, and it's a cloudy, foggy day, and people moving a little slowly. So let's wait about 2 or 3 more minutes before we start. Ops added to our pool here as we go along, but I think we'll be able to take them in without interruption. Yes? I'm going. Hello. Hello. I'm going to turn it over to Rosie at this point for an opening ceremony.
Good morning, everybody. I'm going to just begin the morning by, first of all, lighting some white sage so that we can cleanse the area and just welcome in everybody and the beings seen and unseen. And then I'm going to call in the 4 directions and ask the guardians and the spirits of the different directions to be with us here today. So first the white sage is used by the Native American people. It's a very sacred plant, and they usually smudge themselves each day. That means that they blow the smoke over their body to cleanse their etheric body, and they usually do that every morning. So I can't do it to everybody, so we'll just offer the sage to our place. Perhaps if we could all stand and face the east. We call to Wabun, to Mikael, and all the guardians of the east, the place of the eagle, of the spring, and we ask that we may receive clarity and illumination on our journey, and that we may learn to see with great vision. If we have been confused, may we now find order. We turn to the right, to the south. We call to Shaunadisi and to Raphael and all the guardians of the south, the place of the mouse, of the coyote, of the summer. The south shield represents the time of innocence, of childhood, and we ask that we may reconnect to the child within each one of us. And then we turn to the west. We call to Mujikiwis and to Gabriel, and to all the guardians of the West, the place of the bear, of introspection, and of all the tomorrows, the place of autumn, and we ask that we may find the place within each of us that connects us with all life, to the oneness of all things. And then to the north. We call to Wabun and to Oriel and all the guardians of the north, the place of the buffalo, of the winter, of wisdom and gratitude, and we ask that we may receive inner knowing and wisdom on our paths. We call to Mother Earth, to Father Sky, to all the beings that are around to come to be with us today in this place. Oh.
Could you remain standing just for a moment? Thank you, Rosie. Many of you might remember who were here last year, Marlo Morgan, and the wonderful story and experience she shared with us of her time with the Aborigines on her walkabout for 4 months in Australia. And I had opportunity about a month or so ago to work with Marlo and Rosie and a few other people in a workshop. And Marlo shared something at that time that was very special. And it was the greeting that the Aborigines make to the universe every morning. And I thought it might be nice to share that with you and for you to be able to experience that. So what I will ask you to do is to turn to the east in a moment, in a moment. And there's a gesture. I'm not wired up to the electronic age. They stand in a gesture like this, okay? And what I will do initially is I will make this greeting so you get an idea of what it's about, and I will go back through it in phrases and ask you to repeat that after me, okay? And then we'll sit down. So if you turn, face the east. Hello, divine oneness. We stand here within you, this special group of your beings. We thank you for this day. We thank you for each other. I thank you for me. We dedicate our day to the honor and purpose of oneness. We ask that everything we need be provided for. We ask that everything we do today, say today, hear today, be only in the highest good. In my highest good, in the highest good for all concerned, and in the highest good for all of life everywhere throughout the universe. End of message. Please repeat after me. Hello, divine oneness.
Hello, divine oneness.
We stand here within you.
We stand here within you.
This special group of your beings.
This special group of your beings.
We thank you for this day.
We thank you for this day.
We thank you for each other.
We thank you for each other.
I thank you for me.
I thank you for me.
We dedicate our day to the honor and purpose of oneness.
We dedicate our day to the honor and purpose of oneness.
We ask that everything we need be provided for.
We ask that everything we need be provided for.
We ask that everything we do today,
We ask that everything we do today,
say today, hear today,
say today, hear today,
be only in the highest good.
be only in the highest good.
In my highest good,
In my highest good,
in the highest good for all concerned,
in the highest good for all concerned,
and in the highest good for all of life, everywhere throughout the universe.
and in the highest good for all of life, everywhere throughout the universe.
End of message.
End of message.
I think that needs to come up a little. Okay, it's not picking me up. And the verse is really a wonderful expression of the total trust with which the Aborigines find their way throughout the world. Most of us are probably familiar with the word or term or concept of dream time from some kind of Aboriginal connotation, so I'll just say a little bit about that now. The dream time refers to the period of the dawn of creation, the time when, as in the Bible, it speaks about the earth being without form and void. Well, the Aboriginal cosmology sees such a time, and that an activity arose by the sky heroes or the creative dreamtime beings, and they brought form into the landscape. And the forms in the landscape are like sacred letters waiting to be read. So when the Aborigines go about the landscape and they stop, wherever they stop is a place that they feel has been waiting to be acknowledged. And they see their wanderings about the landscape as continuously keeping alive the original creative impulse. They don't see their transition in this world as it's a stopover on the way to a better place. They see this as paradise. So every morning they get up and they ask for all their needs to be met. And when they wander around to the outback, they don't have a tractor trailer load of food following them along. And Marla Morgan expressed it very beautifully. She said, every time their needs are met, it's as if it happened for the first time. Total joy and gratitude. So we've begun a very slow process of kind of showing up, honoring the different points of relationship and connection. And what I'd like to do to close out this opening is to begin to honor the spirits of this place. Okay? What I want to do now is to give you an experience of entering into the sphere of sound as an extension of your own senses. In a moment I'm going to strike this chime, and my intention in doing that will be to encourage us to create a sensitive interface with the energies of the spirit being of this place. When we do that, we've already asked that our needs be met, and that what we do here today be in the highest good. And I'd like for us to continuously expand on what that means and what that experience is, because I believe that what we do here today, what you do anywhere, makes a difference everywhere. And if we're able to move into the experience of the reality that what we're doing here right now is a contribution not only to this place, to the work of the American Society of Dowsers, for you as individuals, but it is in fact a deed for the entire lifeblood of the planet. That is my intention. I invite you. I will be doing everything that I can to dance you over the threshold into that experience and to participate in creating that experience together. So, when it's sound a chime, my intention then is to allow all the beings that are constellated here that are really not essential to the work that we're about to do to relax. They can take 5, they can back off a little bit. And so that a space will be there to invite the participation of whatever being, spirit, presence, guide, whatever your cosmology works with, that's there for you. Whatever that you will begin to develop a sense of what direction in your soulscape to be looking and listening for whatever it is you're here to receive. So I'll sound the chime. Then I'm going to ask you to comment a little bit on what your experience at that moment is. I'd like to take just a moment to hear some impressions from you of your experience of this space right now. Anybody? Yes.
My thoughts were really scattered. And I'm really glad to be here, but I was not here. And that flushed out things that I couldn't flush out. And more time to receive.
Well, one of our sages who's fallen on hard times, Woody Allen, has said 80% of life is just showing up. And deeds like this help us to come into that very, very simple experience. If we succeed today in having a moment where everybody in this room really shows up and is present, a deed of great power will have been created. And each of you can help to create that by simply showing up. Anybody else? Yes? Yes. Wonderful. Isn't it interesting how the same essential experience is cognized in different ways by people? It's so important to honor the fact that there is more than one way to experience. So the sonic doorway, we're going to be creating sonic doorways today. And when each of you goes through, some of you will choose to enter some of the doorways, some won't interest you. For some of you, waking the dream time may be a time to have a good nap. But there will be a lot of opportunity there, but it will be unique, and really honor the fact that it's not only okay, but it's what's so, that each person is going to have their own individual way of experiencing the dream time. We've already made several steps in our journey. Okay, anybody else? Yes. Thank you for helping to cool it off in here. Yes. Yeah, that's in shamanic journeying, that's often what is one of the suggested images that one might work with. But these kind of images arise spontaneously if we just pay attention to sound. It's as if when such a sphere of sound is created, that it reaches out into such a point. I stated the intention out of which I was sounding it, and when the sphere reaches the point of connection with the answer to that question, I was dowsing. And when that question was answered, each of you received the response in your own way. So each of you was a part of that dowsing process, reaching out, touching the beings and energy of this place. Anybody else before we move on? Yes, a few more. Good. Wonderful. All that and off an old doorbell chime. That's great. Yes. how does this physical space right now feel to you? Any different? Do you connect that with that experience? Does anybody experience this space in a different way? I guess is what I'm asking. Yes. Could you repeat that a little louder, please? Okay. Cleaner. Okay. My experience often is, and it is right now, is that I don't feel bound by the physical contours. I mean, the physicality of this still exists, but it's as if we've kind of like pumping up bagpipes. That's sort of what we're doing. We're blowing air into we're creating this form together, and it's pumping up. Have you ever seen a hot air balloon being prepared for? It's just a flaccid bag, and then they start putting some heat and warmth into it, and it starts to fill up and ripple, and next thing you know, it's standing. Well, it's sort of at the rippling stage right now for me. It's wonderful. We can take it as far as we want. We can actually lift it off if we choose. I'm all for that. Anybody else want to comment before we move on? Yes, one more. Do you want to say anything about it, Rosie?
I just love to hear all these different experiences. I think I always learn so much from listening to everybody's different experiences of sound and experience. I think it's wonderful. I feel that when you use the sound like that, the place does become lighter. It was interesting for you to say it's sort of cleaner. For me, it's like a lightening of the air when we use the sound like that. Mm.
Sort of like when Blake said, when the doors of perceptions are cleansed, then what we've only seen through a glass darkly, we will see face to face. It's that kind of cleansing. We're attentive. We're more likely to pay attention in the direction that our attention wants to be placed. What I'd like to do now is provide you with a little bit of experience of one of the tools that the Aborigines work with in continuing to keep their relationship with the Dreamtime creators alive. The instrument is called the didgeridoo. And the story, or the legends that go with the didgeridoo, the Wangina, as they're called, gave the didgeridoo to the real people, as they call themselves, as kind of a direct hotline. In other words, whenever you feel a little out of touch, this is a way of getting back in touch. It's also a tool that's used for what we would call healing and ceremony, but the Aborigines make no such distinction. They just do what needs to be done when it needs to be done. The didgeridoo is also an instrument for deepening their connection with the spirit nature of the animals and the spirit nature of the landscape. So they would work with, they would listen to the sounds of nature, and then they would play the sounds through the didgeridoo, and it would take them over into the being nature of the animal. So I'm going to play a little bit, and then we're going to do a duet, no pun intended, together. Then we'll give you some experience of what sitting around an Aboriginal campfire might be like. Rosie will sing a little bit or tone with me while I do that. So there'll be 3 steps. In my cosmology, when things like this happen, it's what the Native Americans call the coyote at work. You familiar with that? And I always consider that a real left-handed confirmation from the universe that something significant wants to happen. And, you or I can react by getting very frustrated with it, or you can just laugh, because that's all the coyote's challenged to do. It's also the greatest rationalization for clumsiness and ineptness I've come up with yet. Well, I think that inflated the balloon a little bit more. Before I give this over to Rosie, could you say a little bit about your experience with the didgeridoo, which is immense at this point?
I'm a novice.
And maybe you all would like to share a bit about it before we go into.
You will see when I start to play what it's like when you first begin. Ross does this circular breathing, which is wonderful, which you apparently you learn to do it with a straw blowing through water. Well, I've been trying and haven't succeeded yet, so you'll have to bear with me because I can last for about 30 seconds. But you have to keep going. It's a great way of really opening up your lungs and stimulating your body, so I'm keeping trying.
One of the things, aside from taking you over into relationship with the spirit nature of the landscape and so forth, all of the acupuncture meridians come to focus in the lips, and it stimulates those in a very incredible way. It also, because it creates some very rich frequencies that are truly food. We'll go into this a little later, the work of Alfred Tomatis, who discovered that the ear and the auditory channel has more nerve endings than any other part of the body, and that certain sounds and frequencies are in fact food or nourishment or give us energy. So it does that, and if you listen to the didgeridoo for any length of time, it affects your hearing. It doesn't diminish it. You begin to hear qualities in your voice and the things around you. The refrigerator will start to sound interesting. And this is still legal. It also, at any level that you enter into it, it's very satisfying. You don't have to be doing circular breathing in order to get benefit and to enjoy the instrument. But if with a circular breathing, what you're doing is a form of the yoga charging breath. So you really are very, well, anyway, it's great. I'm going to give this to Rosie. I'm going to pick up another one over here, and we'll play along together for a minute.
You got great cheeks, too. Yeah.
You can go all day if you want. takes a lot of nerve to do something that you don't feel, you know, we just hamstring ourselves because we feel we can't do things perfectly. And I just really appreciate those who just willing to just put it right out there.
It's fun.
Thank you. It's good.
It's great. You really do get stimulated. I recommend getting it. Yeah.
What are your lips?
They tingle.
Do.
Actually,
Do they
Ross,
do?
it's interesting because I've had skin cancer, and Ross was just saying yesterday that it helps to stimulate. That might help.
What
You
do
kind
you
of
do with them? That's what you
yeah,
do?
and it kind of you, afterwards your lips feel all tingly. And
Yeah.
it really does stimulate all the.
Basically, all you're doing is going. And that, just to be able to do that, you know, requires relaxing, being willing to look foolish, and relaxing the facial mask in order to be able to do that. And then when you transfer that to the didgeridoo, it's what's called the drum. And then the next element that you might want to bring would be rhythm. And I'll exaggerate a little bit, you would bring move the diaphragm. Then with the cheeks, you can make and then the tongue. So it's a very simple instrument, but you have several permutations you can work with. You can do very complex things with the tongue. And then what are called vocalizations. Well, if you any sound that you can make in your throat that doesn't require moving the lips will be slightly bent or altered or sent off in a slightly unusual direction. Goes home. I think of it. Well, the sound of a wolf or a dog howling would be. I'm just going while playing it, and it changes that way, or an eagle cry. And from Australia, the kookaburra bird goes. Before we go into the duet, I'd like to just get some of your impressions or experience of hearing sounds of this nature. We'll be a little later, Rose and I will dialogue a little bit about sound and music and, you know, what we think might be going on with this. I'd like to hear just a little bit from you. What is your actual experience right now of hearing this kind of sound, having this kind of sound experience? Anybody? Yes.
Well, I first heard the didgeridoo with the Australian soundtrack. And when I heard it, I just knew I was hearing something very primordial. And that's my feeling today and was then, always, when I hear it, something very wonderful and ancient and primordial.
Mm-hmm. And right now, is that true?
Well, not as much as in the movies,
Mm-hmm. Okay.
but
We'll try harder.
you asked.
Anybody else? I can't. Yeah.
Seems to me sound is something that is a great source of joy and also a good on art, especially
It's, yeah, okay.
I have a feeling of a vibration massage, like a kind of massage of vitality with two masses.
Mm.
Renewing yourself, but more physical. It's therapy.
Hey, over here, and then I'll. Yeah, it's very definitely lower chakra city, isn't it? Yeah. And it's so true. At least, well, I spent most of my adult life, on spiritual quest, and what I thought that was about most of the time, life. I wasn't very interested in practical, earthly things at all, and I probably needed to do that at that time. And what I've gradually, I had an experience of what I come to call a great awakening, hearing the call of the earth, the song of the earth, and this has put me on a path of discovering. I was very amazed to find that there was a 50,000-year-old tradition that honored and acknowledged the kind of experience that I was having personally that were kind of scary, and I thought it was crazy, and nobody talked about it. Does it sound familiar? And I discovered that these things, sound, have been worked with in intentional ways. I think the key, too, is intention, either in the producing of the sound or to have the intention on the hearing to totally freely enter over into the experience of the sound so that the primal sound, or the nada, as they say in the Vedic tradition, the primal sound that is still sounding, it never ceased, but it's kind of trapped in form, and it's waiting to be sung, listened to, acknowledged, have the door unlocked. So any sound or tone that you truly give your attention over to is equally a doorway. It's just that certainly the frequencies more naturally and easily take us into that place of relaxation and openness. Just a few more comments. We could just, everything that we need to know about the dream time already lives in this room out of what's happened already. We're just going to simply be recapitulating it and doing it again and putting different costumes on it and so forth. Yes. Wisdom's memory. You begin to remember. Yeah. Okay, you like to hear?
Imagine maybe fire, use the breath, sacred breath, and the spirit, and then letting it come up. And retreat on itself.
There's a wonderful passage in the book Secrets of the Soil by Christopher Bird, Peter Tompkins. And there's a section that deals with different ways of working with sound, evoking the devotee and seed, songs that could be sung to quicken life and seed. And there's a process called Agnihotra, probably the most exotic thing you'll hear this weekend, but it's a process that a lot of people are working with, which involve burning cow dung and refined butter at certain times of day with certain mantras. And someone asked one of the people who brought that tradition from India, well, what is it that's significant about that? What's really working? He said it's the sound of the flame. Anybody else? Okay. The last one. Well, we'll get into that in a moment a bit more. There is the ahata and the anahata, the struck sound, the unstruck sound. Well, sometimes the struck sound, such as this, can be the doorway or the dowsing rod to point us in the direction of hearing the unstruck sound. We'll talk a bit more about mantras and work with that a little bit later. Oh, one more, okay. Speak up. Well, it's a good exercise for you. Yeah, that's beautiful. I have a wonderful tape of someone who has united Celtic music and the didgeridoo music. And about, on the hearing, it's the most unlikely thing you can imagine. And in listening to that, the image evokes for me the Celtic music really is like a fairy dance, It's very light. And then the didgeridoo comes in, it's sort of like somebody invited the trolls to the party. But it works, but it works. And there's a lot in that. I'm going to play a little bit here, and we're going to do this together. So what is your intention here, Rosie?
My intention is to keep in tune with you.
Hoping for something more constant.
No. My cosmic intention is to actually just open to flow and allow the sound, whatever sound comes through me, that will be in harmony with that.
There's a wonderful process that I've learned from a woman named Sarah Benson. I'll be working with Sarah and Molly Scott at the end of September. That's the other thing I mentioned. There's a mailing list over here if anybody's interested in knowing about more things that would be going on in this nature that I'm involved with. And she has a process she calls the Song of the Soul, which encourages people to allow what wants to be sung or spoken to be spoken. And that's essentially what we're going to do. Now that we have a shared experience of sound together done with intention, I'd like to just step back a little bit and get a framework of at least how I look and work with sound, and Rose and I look at and work with sound and share that, and then I'd like to hear from you. When the beginning was the sound, and when that sound went forth, it began to interact with itself and began to become more complex. And what we know of as form is simply at this moment in time, the product of that interaction. So form is condensed sound. My experience is that many forms, and especially forms that human beings create in an unconscious way, are waiting to be released. The sound that there's something trapped in the form. Another picture of that, I guess, is a picture of the dragon in the landscape. And most people, when they hear about a dragon, well, they find something else to do or somewhere to go. But they're specialists who have learned to listen, and they hear the cry of the dragon as a cry for release and for help. And if you find that relationship to what is asking for help, and it may ask for it in a rather awkward way, in a way that may seem a little unpleasant and so forth, but if you can hear through to what's below that level that might be upsetting to you and respond to it, something very important can be released. We could call that healing. In other words, when a condition that's irritating lives in our presence, in our life, whether we know about it, it's often a call to awaken some complementary or to awaken some other capacity. And certainly my experience that working with sounds in a way that's without any expectation or assumption, especially sounds, very simple sounds like this, has a way of loosening and unlocking what we carry in our DNA molecules, our genetic potential, or what we truly are as human beings to share. I believe that we wouldn't be here now if we didn't carry what was needed. We don't have to go anywhere to find these things. We have it within. And that these experiences with sound have a way of removing like blowing the dust off a book, and you can see the title a little clearer, or it's other pictures there. If I step back into Aboriginal cosmology for a moment, if you were to see an Aboriginal map, it wouldn't look like your Rand McNally Atlas, with roads and turns and things like that. And an Aboriginal map of the landscape might be composed of what we would probably call sacred geometrical forms, and maybe an animal or two thrown in. And it speaks of the Aboriginals' perception of the implicate order or what lies below or behind the form. And so that's what they put down, what they see as important. And someone who's open to experiencing nature in that way can find a way across the landscape because they will perceive those energy patterns. Now, when they're represented in a physical way, they might be sacred geometrical forms. In an audible way, they would be sound and song. The Aborigines have, when they go on walkabout, many times what they are doing are recapitulating the journey of the song lines. The song lines are the connecting links between the various holy sites in the environment, and a correspondence to the meridians in the body connecting the acupuncture points. So it's very important that they show up at certain places at certain times to stimulate those points, very much in corresponding with stimulating acupuncture points on the human body. And they also honor the habitat of the animals. There are certain places where they perceive, under the Dreamtime law, that the animals actually originally sprang from the earth in these places. And those places are usually the habitat of the animals, and the animals are not taken as food in those places. And I've thought a lot about this, and I think we can really easily get fastened on the hubris of being a human being, when in fact the animals are really carrying the burden of keeping the life processes of the earth alive in spite of a lot of human activity. So when the animals congregate in a place and have ceremony, they are essentially doing the same thing that the Aborigines are doing. When they show up on a place, they participate in the process of quickening or enlivening the beings and spirits of the place, which tend to kind of doze off a little bit. Sort of like the curator in a museum. They sit there all day. They're really eager to answer your questions, but there's nothing happening. They can sort of doze off a little bit. So when you come along and poke them, they're very glad to have been awakened and perform their function. So that's kind of my picture as they go about the landscape. That's what they're doing. Or sometimes it's like the real spiritual underlying forms are like made of a substance that's it doesn't hold its form very well, like Jello, and it it heaps up, but it starts to sag. So they come along and they heap it back up again. And the animals, I think, have been performing this function since the beginning of time. And so when the birds migrate back and forth from their nesting grounds and feeding grounds, or their sacred habitats or their sacred space, as they go through the air, probably there's a very direct relationship between the song lines of the Aborigines and the migratory patterns of birds. And some of the same processes are going on. As the birds move through the air, they are stirring the etheric. They're not only making song and sound, which incidentally also has a very stimulating process on life forms. They've done a lot of work showing that when the birds start singing in this valley, or out here, that the stomata of the leaves on the trees open a little more quickly. And then 5 minutes later, the birds start to sing in the next valley. And 5 minutes later, the next valley. And the picture is there's a continuous wave of sound that's continuously circling the earth, massaging, stirring, keeping alive the etheric. Another picture of that is a deed that someone said something like this back there. It's this activity constitutes an organ that the earth has for assimilating energies that are coming from the cosmos and also rising from the earth, and transducing or digesting or partially assimilating them so that they can be taken up by all the life forms. There's a man named Alfred Tomatis. One of his books is called The Conscious Ear. He's probably one of the foremost people in the world today on working, exploring sound and the healing aspects of sound. And he was once called into a situation where, in a Benedictine monastery, where the regimen that had gone on for centuries in this monastery of 16 hours, many hours a day of chanting, work, and maybe 3-4 hours of sleep had gone uninterrupted for 3 or 4 centuries. And somebody came with a bright idea. We could get a lot more done here if these guys weren't sitting around chanting all the time. And so they stopped doing that. And but what happened very quickly was a lot of illness occurred, and their energy levels, and actually were able to do quite a bit less. So they called in a doctor, and the doctor said, well, it's obvious what the problem is here. It's this crazy vegetarian diet. He eats some red meat. In fact, they've been eating a vegetarian diet for 300-400 years was incidental. So he did that, and things got even worse. And so Tomatis was called in, and he suggested going back on the regimen of doing the chanting for 6-8 hours a day, see what happened. And what happened was the monks became energized, the health problems disappeared, and he's had a number of experiences like that to show how sound is food. Sound does energize, and it's sound in a certain frequency range, but it also has to do with the intention out of which the sound can make. Rosie, what are some of your thoughts and feelings about the importance of music and sound for today?
Well, there's lots, but I think one of the most interesting things I see at the moment happening is that the native people when they speak of the dolphin, they say that the dolphin will come in this time and bring us the gift of language again. And it's really interesting to see the effect that dolphins have had, particularly on children. I work a lot with children, and children got together all over North America to really rally against the tuna fish companies and to change the drift net fishing policy. And they actually succeeded. And dolphins, the sound that the dolphins use, the sonar that they use, has been shown to be incredibly effective in healing. I met a woman in Montreal at a conference, and she had been swimming and working with dolphins. And one day she was out with a partner, and her partner got really bad cramp in her leg, so bad that she could hardly swim. And immediately the dolphins came on either side of her. 2 dolphins came, one on the other side of her, and they started to use the sonar, between them. And within minutes, her leg had healed and she was able to swim again and go back to shore. And Marlo Morgan told us how the Aboriginal people spent at least a month every year with the dolphins off the coast of Australia, and they would communicate with them and learn from them. And so I've found lately that it's interesting to see how as the native people said, the dolphin will come back and teach us the language. But the language of sound is what the dolphins, the whales, many of the other creatures on Earth use. And we have actually sort of lost that. Like this gentleman over here said, often we live in cities and we're bombarded with all these perhaps unnatural sounds. I mean, if we think that human beings are the only natural thing, then maybe they might be thought of as natural. But I live in the country. When I go to the city, I find it really difficult to readjust. And so I think this is also a time when we are being called to come and learn about things like the didgeridoo, about toning, which we're going to do later on, because somebody else said over here, it's like a reawakening, it's a remembering. Our DNA is in fact remembering the primordial sounds that we need to have at this time to help us to heal ourselves and our bodies. So those are some of the thoughts I've had.
That's a sound.
Someone mentioned mantrams earlier, and a mantram is a sound or a series of syllables or a phrase or a prayer that has one picture is like this great cosmic radio with a lot of stations on it, and each mantram is a specific energy frequency tuning in to one aspect of all the totality of the energetic possibilities in the universe. And there are mantrams that are very ancient, and there are mantrams that have to do with many spiritual traditions. What interests me about listening to these forms and the toning and the overtoning we're going to do later, and also listening to the song of the earth, is that I believe that new mantrams are being awakened that belong to the earth's condition at this time. That these are not only, there's a mutual process that goes on as we listen very deeply to the song of the earth. Our capacity to listen is enhanced, and as our capacity to listen is enhanced, we'll hear deeper and deeper levels as we participate in an awakening and a releasing of what needs to be sung. So may tell some stories later about some experiences of hearing the new mantrams. And it's not, now in my cosmology, I honor the tradition of the transmission of the mantram directly from human guru to disciple. And that's true, and it's very important that exists as a reality. It is also true that the earth itself is probably the ultimate guru. Mother, lover, brother, counselor, guide, many different types of relationship are possible, and one is to teach us to play or sing. And the Aborigines listen to the creatures of the sound in nature. I hope you will go forth from this not thinking that you need to do any of the particular things that you see Rosie and I doing, but it simply opens doorways for you to explore and to carry forward and to find the sounds that arise in you. Many people tell me about being in places in nature and being moved to make sounds in a spontaneous way. And this is a very important thing to allow yourself to enter into the experience of, because the sounds are not only personally healing and cleansing, not only beneficial to the earth, but in that interplay where 2 or 3 are gathered together, the presence can arise. Or another way of saying it, if you get into that process of listening, interacting, and being obedient to the awareness of what arises out of that relationship, you stand on the threshold of what I call the near life experience. And that's what we're poised on right now. The balloon is kind of lifted up off the ground at this point. You know, it's not quite upright, but it's off the ground. It's obvious the direction it's headed in. Could you say a little bit more about toning, Rosie, and then share the exercise we've been talking about doing with toning?
Sure. Well, I started doing harmonic overtones about 4 years ago when I was doing some shamanic work, and I've since tried to learn a little bit more about it. I've worked with Ross and read a few books and listened to a few other teachers. And basically, what happens is the whole universe is resonating with sound. And I was just reading in a book called The Cosmic Octave how each day the world is turning to the tone of G. And they have done experiments in Germany on the DNA and found that the frequency of the Earth's turning is always, the sound is always affecting the protein in our cells and our DNA. And so when we do tones, harmonic overtones, which are based on the tones that we know, A, E, I, O, U, are the vowel sounds that we use. And we can do any tone on the music scale, it doesn't really matter. But when we start to do that, as you'll see when we do it and we'll share with you, it seems to have an effect on our body. For me, it makes me feel a lot lighter, have a lot more energy, and feel very, very alive. And I found with other people that I've worked with that they have had the same experience. Sometimes when you're feeling very tired, if you can just take a moment or two and do some tones, anybody can do it, as you'll see. It will waken you up and it will make you feel more vibrant because it seems to realign our etheric body and to put our bodies into balance. So maybe, but would you like to do the chakra thing or after?
Well, I think you've kind of set us up to do the
To the
other
toning,
one.
yeah, let's do.
We'll do that in
Okay.
a second. We're going to come a little closer. We're going to come a little close together. We're going to do some overtoning together, and then after that, we'll share a little bit about it, and we'll give you a little instruction, crash course in overtoning, so that in the second session, we'll be able to work with that and do it together. The hardest part about doing it is not doing it, is coming back and interacting. Would like to kind of demythologize the process a little bit. It's actually a lot of fun and relatively easy to learn to do. I'm going to give you a few ways of experimenting with producing a tone. It's very helpful when you're trying to listen to yourself. You see the old radio announcer doing it. If you cup your ear, and also if you put your hand in front of your face, about like that, so the sound will be reflected back, so you can pick it up, so you can actually hear what you're doing. One of the ways of beginning to work with overtoning with the front of the mouth would be to say the syllable mir, which is the Russian word for tree in the earth, I believe. Right. Mir, 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 mir. Try that. If you then pay attention to little buzzes, little funny little sounds, and if you, it's very interesting, when some little squeak occurs, if you give attention to it, it's like a little seed, but sometimes with flower. And they speak about the overtone flower, and when they try to record overtone, sometimes it doesn't pick up very well, very close, and they have to put the mic out 15 or 20 feet and up in the air because they say that's where the overtone flowers. And if you give attention to that, and go even more slowly, and move your lips even more slowly, and other little tones will emerge, and it's an incredible meditative tool. It's also used by the in certain shamanic traditions. It's used by Tibetan monks as a way of entering over into the spiritual world. Let me show you another thing to do with the front of the mouth, which is with the whoa sound. I think what we'll do is do a little bit of this, and then we'll do this. Try to work a little bit of time. To do it.
Maybe it'd be nice just to do some funny,
Okay, I'm gonna hold that. Okay. Let me give you a couple more things to work with. If you're, there's a very nasal sound, like somebody sounds very awful to begin with, but if you honor them and stay with them, they point you in the direction of something kind of neat. And then there's one technique that involves placing the tongue just beyond, about 2/3 of the way between the teeth and the soft palate. And you touch the tongue kind of lightly, and the base of the tongue is sort of dancing. And then what are called the Tibetan voices, which actually go back prior to the time of Buddhism. When Buddhism came into Tibet, what I believe to be so is that they discovered that the Bon shamans were working with these voices. And they just borrowed some of the voices and put their scriptures to it. And there's one of the voices that's, and you start like with the inner sanctum creaking door. Let's hear that one. Build it and she doesn't come. We'll come back. Well, it's very interesting. You overtones, even with all my experience, I can't always know that if I create the condition, it's going to be there. Let me put this up so you can hear the Those tonal frequencies are very strong and very healing. I learned to do that by being with a man named Jonathan Goldman. He's written a very wonderful book called Healing Sounds, the Power. Called Healing Sounds, the Power of Harmonics. Thank you. And in that book, he describes his experience of trying every way in the world to learn to do that, those voices. And he paid someone from India who could do it for about 20 seconds. And he did it once and just ripped his throat out for about a month. And so he had opportunity to be with the Tibetan monks on a tour during the recording. And one morning he woke up and he was able to make the sound. And I had the same experience with him being in this workshop, hearing him do it. And I thought, well, I'll try this once on the way home. I was really afraid of blowing my voice because I think it was just before last year's dowsing convention. And I was able to do it. And it's very effortless. And all the trying I had tried to do was very painful. And I think what's really significant about being in places like the dowsing convention is that you're in an energy field where your ability to pick up capacities and awaken is very much enhanced. And being receptive and being present to what you're experiencing may very well have that consequence for you. Not necessarily doing any particular thing, not replicating what you hear us do, but opening what is next and most important for you. What? Jonathan Goldman, Healing Sounds, The Power of Harmonics. Jonathan also says something very wonderful in that book. He's gone all over the world working with different systems, and he would run across one spiritual stream that said only these tones could be associated with the chakras. And then another one say, no, these tones. No, and then, wars are fought over such things. And he came up with a formula. He thought about this a lot, and he came out with a formula that says it's intention plus frequency that equals balance and harmony. Now, both things are true. There are definitely certain sounds that are primordially connected with our energy centers. And in any given moment, if I were to be working with someone, I won't probably do this process in this context, but there's a process of scanning the body with sound. It's very simple, and with the intention of locating the place that needs to be where the energy is stagnant or is calling for attention. And it may not necessarily, someone approached me yesterday who had a migraine headache and asked me if I would work with her, and I did, and we did this exercise. And in fact, as I scanned her body, where the overtone jumped out was in the area of the abdomen, which most of us probably would think would be natural, because migraines are often associated with, metabolic processes trying to find their way home in the wrong way. So it was, and then I did a tone that wasn't necessarily the tone that would be associated with the solar plexus, but the tone that was called for at that moment to create the balance. So that's an example of what I would call the new mantrams, is being able to reverence and respect the ancient traditions, but also to be able to allow oneself to be guided to do what is appropriate. What do you want to do? Okay, let's just do that. All right, that's great. Okay, and then we'll open. Okay. You can. I've always thought that in music, the really important stuff is what happens in the interval. That's when we become alive and inwardly active. And it's also true in convention. Some of the best stuff happens in the intervals. So we're going to end this morning session, create an interval for you, and we'll be starting again at 11. I see the balloon is standing, and I think sometime between 11 and 12:30 it's going to lift. Okay. So do you want to stand in a circle, or would you like to do that?
We could stand in a circle around the edge of the room.
Could we form a circle around the edge of the room? Rosie, why don't you separate just a little bit? Okay, everybody join hands with the person who's next. This is a two-step operation. Now everybody has a hand. Usually just enough hands to go around. Okay. Now, could you then reach and join hands with the person that's next to the person that you were just holding hands with? In other words, just expand a little bit. Everybody connected? Okay. Now, what we'd like to do is just, we've been collecting little treasures and nuggets and, stuff like that. What I'd like us to do is to leave it all here. In other words, when those beings and energies and presences that we have requested to step back a little bit. I'd like when they come forward, there be a feast here for them, that we give away the energy that we have collected. Because you see, it's only an empty cup that can be useful anyway. So I'm asking you to empty yourselves again in preparation for being filled again. So that would be my intention, that we make a gift of blessing to this place. So that's a gift. You see, anything you do anywhere makes a difference everywhere, and you do nothing for yourself ultimately anyway. Although we'll be probably the initial beneficiaries of what we'll do, but we'll also make the preacher's job a little easier. Maybe Dan's will be a little bit brighter place. Maybe what we do here will reach out to the confines of this continent. And if our imagination or courage is great enough, it can be a deed of earth acupuncture for the entire lifetime of the planet. That's why I'm here. So I invite you to join in. We could do this for 3 days, but it's usually clear when it's finished. There's a name or tonal signature that goes with the place. You already know what that is. You just need to remember it. So I just want you to do that. Whatever your sense of that tonal signature is, and let that lead and feel around and find this place.
need to, maybe make
Well, would you like one in this kind of,
yeah, I think, yeah, that kind of thing.
oh, I'd love to do that. It may take me up to a month to be able to do it.
Not a problem. And I've been trying to douse to see if there's a particular kind of wood
I wanted to get my hand in
that is strong feelings.
Guess I could
But rather try to your douse.
Okay,
maybe
all right,
have
yeah.
high energy feelings.
Yeah, no, I remember you well. So what I will do is, I don't mind.
Oh, gets me. It just gets me. Like nothing else that I ever do just gets me.
Why don't I make sure I have your, be sure to put your name and address on the end.
Oh, okay.
And put it there. I'll take your card, but I can leave the card.
Right.
And just write, make a note, didgeridoo, decide to execute.
That's my business card, but I could also have to stay back
And,
my room.
well, yeah, if you could put your phone number on that, as I get into a little bit, I'll give you a call and give you some idea of when you might.
Okay.
And you can, wait till you see me, pay me, you can pay me part now, you can, whatever I want to do.
Tell me what time I prefer to do it.
Why don't you pay me $100 now? See, I think we're probably talking somewhere between $150 and $150. I don't know what the shipping is going to be. Yeah, that would work.
Yeah.
So if you want to make me a check at some point.
Yeah, I've got that back in my room, sometime in a couple days. You spelled
D-I-D
D-I-D?
J-E-R-I-D-U or D-O or D-O-O. Different spelling.
D-I-D.
But I don't believe it's that.
Well, you probably could.
I mean, I'd like to have like this.
Yeah, that's one of those things. Okay. Let me do that.
Oh, see, that's where the and I dropped in there yesterday for the last time. Oh, yeah, I went to see this.
Access is over.
I might want to go back. Definitely, I mean, it's real positive energy. So why wouldn't it be so? I think I'm going to learn this one. Their health problems, how to prevent stuff from because I was once I was told by the person that we had a little larger we are within the next time.
I'll be over on the green. There's a ladder. Well, that's right up your alley too. I worked a lot with the 7th Circuit. Good.
There was a lot I wanted to say, but basically,
Yes, I am in the Albany area, Albany, as far as I'm going.
See, this goes
Cold Springs area. If you like to have the help create a focus or I can come that far. The little yellow pamphlet there has my phone number and also give you a little bit of an idea of how you can talk to people about what you do.
No, I want to
Give me a call.
So maybe I could find him some.
Well, if I call, I'll call.
But no, she just starts running around.
Sure, yeah, I'll try to be there as soon as I can. It's probably about 1. I should get there. And if somebody
Hello, Ross.
Yeah, good to see you.
Yeah, nice to connect with you.
Going to see this guy.
Oh, yeah. They'll cross and they'll parallel sometime. I want to do something sometime.
Yes, likewise. Well, we are on some level, I know that.
That's what I thought. See, that's the way of combining everything.
What you said about healing or working on someone
Well,
I was the one in the truck that's going to come out this morning, wiping the sleep off your eyes.
Like I said yesterday.
and I put down I'm just allowing.
And another place we don't want to go, I don't think they even have a list of, we went yesterday, what, just so stuff that is absolutely positively no air to we just all sat there. And that's, I went yesterday, and that was, it was absolutely excellent.
All right, that's all.
Excellent, he cut right to the chase, you know, he was very, that was this morning,
So
so
that's basically,
that was a 9
then,
o'clock visit.
again, it's not just playing around, moving around, it's good stuff. It's a matter then of allowing the sound to be called forth. I'll say this later. When you know Rumpelstiltskin's name, he no longer has power. So if you sound the name, kind of figure out what the problem is, it loses its power, it's dissolved. And it really wants to reveal this thing. You have to listen to it in a way that you hear it.
Ask them, if you set a tone to something that's wrong, let's say your stomach, or let's say there's just a problem with the way the bacteria is produced, maybe I was thinking that person. Could that last? Would it just change? Or would it change? Maybe someone had a
Feeling
leg.
is about shifting around the vibratory level of consciousness, what it adds attention. works with that. Pearls is a problem, but they're like that. You learn to work with them. It's pretty feeling sorry for yourself, whatever. And maybe having to regulate yourself that is a little more actually strength and positive and discipline, you know. Well, it's sort of like the way they test bells. They tap them, and if they ring true, you know, and if they don't ring true, there might be some little flaw or crack.
Sensitivity.
So that's all I'm doing. I'm ringing it, and I'm hearing coming back, you know, well, sometimes it's not quite able to ring.
Well, you know, I was a singer for a long time, and I'm really a slow person. I'm not visual painting, I'm just a visual. And I'm really coming to understand more how sound is in a certain direction.
Like they say, sound is music soothes the savage. Breath. But it's soothing. Two things. First, if you're familiar with heart, have you ever done anything with your heart?
No, I listened to the tapes and read the book and follow.
It's an incredible book.
Oh, yeah.
I want to write that book.
Stay with me, I just want to get some water.
Because I don't know, the last time I Susan Gregson Dead, the last time, I'm going to see the good but I mean, they do sections of the show where they just let me do whatever he wants, you know, and he just does phenomenal things with sound. I mean, he's using a lot of electronics and things like that, but I think his favorite things, I don't know if you've ever seen it, but he plays these 4 giant cables. He feels, they're giant cables that, they're strung, and he plays it with, I think it's sort of a pipe, a metal pipe, and he'll play it with 2 pipes, and he'll be hitting the cables down here and playing very intricate rhythms with both hands, and of course they're doing stuff with the sound and stuff, it's echoing through the place, but it's incredible what he can do. He feels that he calls it the board, but he thinks he gets the most primal surges from this board. It's absolutely amazing what he does. But my second question is if I could try out one or two of these. What's the technique? You said you're breathing. I could hear you and I could see you breathing. When you're breathing in through your nose, but I don't know how you keep pushing out through your mouth while you're.
You have to build up your cheek muscles to be able to do that a little bit. So that's why you probably, most people it took me 6 months of a lot of practice to finally be able to do that. It's really to do with the strength, the cheek muscle building up to the point. So basically all I do, I tried all the techniques, but what happened was I had a strong intention to learn circuit breathing, and I began to notice there would be short period of time where I would go